Dean Caldwell.
Well, we've come tonight to have a good time. I told Brother Moore a while ago, Brother Larry Moore, he said, am I close enough to the altar? He's sitting up here, and I said, you ain't going to need no altar tonight. This is going to be all carnal. This is all going to be carnal. There could be nothing spiritual go on here at all. We just come tonight to have a good time. Most of my stories, most of my stuff that I tell is centered around church, because that's just what we are. That's who we are. My dad was a pastor. There are 6 of us kids, and we grew up in a parsonage, several parsonages. I went to 11 different schools, some of them 2 times apiece before I graduated. And so you've got to have a lot of fun. Now, when I say we were poor, we were poor. I hear people talk sometimes and say, boy, we were poor. And then I hear them talk, and I'm thinking, you don't know what poor is. When we were growing up, if anybody had 2 cars, they were rich. I mean, you had 2 cars, they're rich. We had 2 cars, but one of them was on blocks in the front yard. It was for parts for the one we were trying to drive. Then when we run out of parts, Dad had to trade. He had to get 2 cars every time we traded to find one somebody had thrown away somewhere. But we grew up like that in church. We played church. We had church. We had church all the time. If Mama ever threw a box, a small box outside, we looked for something to kill so we could have a funeral. Yes. And one of those king-size matchboxes, you know, they're pretty good size, and you can pull them out and display the corpse. And so we would generally try to find a good lizard to put in that, and then me and my brothers would get together and I would preach the funeral. We would display our lizard there, and I'd talk about what a good lizard he was. He was faithful to his family. He loved his family. And if it was a woman, I said, her kids called her blessed, because we had been to a lot of funerals and we'd heard a lot about that. But then we would take it out and bury it in the side of the hill, and then we got bored, we'd dig it up and have another funeral. But that's kind of how we grew up. We grew up in church, and church was our life. I remember when Dad pastored at Mountain View, Arkansas, he told us boys during the week, he said, if the offering is Good Sunday, we'll go to Grandma's on Monday. And that meant me and Terry got to spend the summer with Grandma. Boy, I'm telling you, talk about looking forward to Sunday, I was. So my dad was a lenient man. He let us boys sit anywhere we wanted to in the church as long as the first 2 seats on the front, either side. That's far back as we could go. So Sunday morning, I got up, I got ready, and I went in there and sat down beside Mom, and I said, Mom, I'd like to, if I can, sit on the 5th seat from the front. Now, that may not be nothing to you, but that was an icebreaker for me, because I knew one day I was going to grow up, and I didn't want to be a 15-year-old sitting on the first seat in the front, you know. And she said, no, you can't do that, because I thought there was a scripture in the Bible that said, Dean, go sit with your mother. My dad quoted that nearly every service. So I knew it had to be in the Bible somewhere. And she said, well, why do you want to sit on the 5th seat from the front? I said, because I've never seen a service from the 5th seat from the front. Anyway, I managed to talk her into it. I'm sitting on the 5th seat on the right side from the front. Mama is on the 2nd seat. But my goal was to look at the offering plate when it went by. Because if there's enough money in there, we're going to go to Grandma's the next day. Grandma lives 6 hours away. But the offering plate went by me so fast I couldn't see it. But it hung up with Mama. She's sitting there holding the pan, and Sister Littrell sitting beside her had her money tied up in a handkerchief. And she's sitting there untying the money in her handkerchief, and Mama had the plate in her hand. That wasn't a bag, it was a plate. And I stood up from the fifth seat of the front and I said, does it look like there's enough in there to go to Grandma's on? All of a sudden, my arm went above my head, my feet touching the floor every little bit. Dad took me out in front of the church and he whipped the dog out of me. Then brought me back in and slammed me down on the front seat. There was no padding on the pew. I just made a racket and a thud. Went up, sat down on the platform, put his guitar on his neck, and I stood up and I said, all I wanted to know if there's enough money in there to go to Grandma's on. Here we went back outside again. Now my dad, you know, discipline in that day and time is different than it is now. My dad didn't have a good education, so he didn't understand some of the English language. He didn't know the term time out. He knew nothing about that, the way it's explained now. Now, time out to him is when you come to after about 10 minutes. And grounding, he didn't know that either. Grounding is when you got yourself up off the ground. Yeah, that's how Dad explained things. Dad had a saying, I brought you in this world, I'll take you out. You ever hear this? I'll shut your head up in the door, boy. Don't let me come down. I'll tear you up like a sow's bed. I'm telling you, my dad was a disciplinarian. I just, after I got grown, I thought, you know, I wish he had known about time out. Or grounding. If he had known that, you know, if he had known that, I would have just started to fight with my brothers and say, time out. Time out. I would have went and sat down to some place and, you know, me and my brothers, sometimes Dad would say, get in that room, I'll be in there in a minute. And we knew it was a death sentence. We just knew. We'd sit there on the bed and they'd talk about, it's going to hurt. I'd think, why would you bring that up? We'll be lucky to live through this. This is really going to hurt. They just talking, and I want to give ourselves a spanking. Do you ever want to give yourself a good whipping? And then walk outside and say, hey, Dad, it's taken care of. You go back doing whatever you want to. But that's how we grew up. We grew up. And then, you know, if the offering was good and we get to go to Grandma's, it was a treat for me and Terry to spend the summer with Grandma, because Grandma and Aunt Eva just petted us. Man, they give us money. We would get a dime or nickel every time we went to town, and it wasn't like that at home. I mean, our favorite holiday was Halloween. Forget Christmas. We got a package of Green Army men. We'd bite the heads off of them. We had headless army men. But we'd get to go to Grandma's, and we'd stay at Grandma's for a month, sometimes 2 months during the summertime. Oh, we'd get to take trips, and it was just, they were a bunch of fun. How many remember the old dime stores? That was before Walmart. In fact, this Branson's got one, a dime store in Branson. Well, they used to have those in about every town, and oh, it was such a treat to get to go to the dime store with a quarter. Land, you could buy them out. Quarter, you. And you remember the trays? They had a tray here and a back on it, and a back on this side, and a tray on this side. Well, my grandmother and her sister, which was Aunt Eva, they was there at the on the other side of an aisle that I was looking through to see them. And they were looking through, it was just a pile of ladies' lingerie. And they were looking through that. I went over in the toy section and I got me a rubber snake, about 2.5 feet long. And I came over on this side and I just throwed it up over the top, and it landed in that pile of underwear. Of course, they thought it fell out of the ceiling. And my aunt was terrified of a snake anyway, or a worm, or even a string. You could run her around the house with a string. They went to screaming and went to running. I went around there at the aisle, and they squeezed a gallon of water out of that rubber snake. Going up there and down in front of the store, and they're screaming and carrying on. and telling the manager there's a snake back there. He went back there and picked the rubber snake out, coming to the front. Well, they didn't know it was a rubber snake. And that was when I found out my aunt was not a Christian. She had deceived us all these many years. And they squeezed another gallon of water out of that snake. Snake was dehydrated by the time, but my Aunt Eva run outside. The only thing kept her from whipping the manager, he had the snake. As a kid, I'm thinking, you better keep that. Because I've seen her in action before. They were just terrified. Man, we just had the best time in the world. Staying with Grandma and Eva. They just treated us so good and so fine. We loved it. It was a wonderful part of being a kid. They'd take us places and then they would say, we're not ever taking you back here again. Now I thought it's because we didn't have the money. But I soon found out why. It was my brother Terry. He's into something all the time. But how we grew up and how we lived our life was quite different than most folks. And some folks wouldn't understand that. We grew up, Dad preaching, pastoring little old mountain churches, and we were blessed with 2 toilets. Now for your younger generation, that's not bathrooms. That's outhouses, and it's not porta potties either. If we'd had a porta potty back then, we would have charged. Yeah. We had outhouses. And because Dad pastored the church, we had a men's outhouse and a women's outhouse. And we didn't know any different. We didn't have any running water. We drank out of a water bucket. So if one of us got the flu, all of us had the flu. And so it was always intriguing to me that men would go to the toilet by themselves, but women went in groups. And they've never outgrown that. They still do that to this day. And the women's toilet was quite nice. It had a dividing wall in it, and it had 2 holes. Now the holes were not like you've got now. They didn't have a frame on them. They were just square holes. But they served the purpose. But the women would go in groups and they'd stand outside, they'd laugh, they'd talk, and they'd carry on. 2 go in, 2 come out, 2 go in, 2 come out, then everybody went, and then they come back up the hill to the church. Well, if you know anything about outhouses, you built them with a back where you could get in there and clean it out from time to time. And so it was a nice thing. And one day, Dad bought us a package of firecrackers. Nickel firecrackers. They outlawed them later, and it may have been because they heard this story. I'm not sure. But they were called cherry bombs. Anybody old enough to remember those? Now, we didn't we didn't light that thing and throw it down here and all pop, because we never got nothing like that. We just popped one once in a while, and we used it constructively. We would blow rocks out of the bank to make our little roads for our little wooden cars that we had built. But I got this great idea to scare the women that went to the toilet. And so on Saturday night, we had a Saturday night service, and it was about this time of year, I guess. It was still good in daylight, and I took 2 of those firecrackers, and I went down there, and you know how it is. If you've seen an outhouse, it has a pyramid in the back of it. It just pyramids up. And so I went down there early and punched 2 holes in it. Took 2 of them firecrackers, twisted the fuses together. Well, when you twist them together, there's not much left. And I'm thinking, I'm going to scare them. This is going to be funny. I mean, this is going to be funny. So I got down there early, and here comes some sisters from the church, 5 of them out of one family. Now, they are all grown. They were large. They were grown. I am behind the toilet. I done got my firecrackers set. Nobody in this world explained to me about methane gas. Nobody. I don't know Dad knew anything about it. He knew nothing about methane gas, or he would have warned me. So 2 went in, and when they got seated, they're talking and carrying on, having the best time in the world, and I lit those firecrackers. I was squatted down looking at it, and it said, boom! It covered me. It covered them. The crack between the boards, they were stuff hanging off the ceiling. Yeah. I mean, it boomed. They went to screaming. The women outside went to screaming. I went to screaming. They said, all you could see of me is when I opened my eyes. I was so sick. I was throwing up. Oh, I was so sick. And the worst thing, it had rent my shirt. I knew I was going to get a whipping over that. Wasn't no way out of that. But we're screaming so much. The 5 women was screaming, and they had the high-pitched screaming. I was screaming and crying and throwing up at the same time. You ever try to gag and scream? Almost impossible. When I come out from behind the toilet, I look like a monster. Did. We were screaming so much, people was coming out of the church, walking down the hill. When Dad seen me come out from behind the toilet, he just cut him a limb. Yeah. And the man whipped me till the flies wouldn't even light on me. And I was fly bait, I'll tell you that. Oh, he whipped me. He'd whip me a while and he'd say, why? What's wrong with you? Well, Mama heated up a pan of water and took down there for the women to clean up with, and took 3 pans for them to clean up with. But the tragedy of it is the whole family quit the church. I don't get that. I've seen people quit church over the music. I've seen them quit church because they didn't like the color of the carpet, or they didn't get to teach a class. But just because a toilet blowed up, why would you quit a church over that? Well, they did. All 11 of them. There wasn't but 2 involved. Looked like they would have quit and let the others come. But the whole bunch quit. And for years after that, my dad would tell me, if they don't get back in church, you'll answer to God for that. He told me that 2 years before Dad passed away. You better hope they got back in church, because you're going to answer to God for that. I said, Dad, I was just a kid. No, you knew better. Well, several years ago, back in 2006, I guess it was, we were in revival in a church. And after the church service was over, this lady kept hanging around, just hanging around. Everybody had nearly left. The pastor and his wife was there, Peggy and I, this lady, and another couple. And I walked back there, and she said, Dean Caldwell. I said, yes, ma'am. I saw your picture in the paper and advertisement. I just thought I'd come and see you. I said, I am glad you did. She said, my name is, and I'm changing the names to protect the innocent. My name is Betty Sue. And I said, Oh, I am so sorry. I said, this is all I like, making heaven. Are you in church? She said, well, yes, we do go to church. I said, all of you? Well, no, my brother. Ooh. Any chance they're going to get to go to church? I said, ma'am, I'm so sorry for what I've done. She said, well, it's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. I said, no, ma'am, it wasn't funny then. It's not funny now. I don't see it ever being funny. Well, when it come down to trouble, we had our share of it. We sure did. Had a Sunday school teacher. Now, that's back when we had Sunday school for kids. Had a Sunday school teacher, and every Sunday she come in, she talked about her German Shepherd dog. First 10, 15 minutes of every class, we heard about her German Shepherd dog. What a precious dog it was. She loved that dog. But that dog would bite you. Mean. But she loved him. And one Sunday she came in, and she was crying. And she said, called her dog by name. And she said, he got run over this week. And then she went into this big spiel. He's in the arms of our loving Lord, and the Lord is loving on him, and he just kind of whining, and God's, oh, he loved his chin rubbed, and I'm sure the Lord's rubbing his chin. I lifted my hand. And she said, what do you want? I said, that dog busted hell wide open. He went to hell. Every hair is singed off of him. He's howling, he's whining, he's frying in hell. Well, she run out the class. It wasn't but a minute, but Dad stuck his arm in the door and done this. We wasn't but one room from behind the church. He took me behind the church. The man whooped, he kicked, he stomped. And he said, you don't know where Rex went. Oh, they'll use the dog's name. You don't know if he went to heaven or hell. Then he whooped some more. And when he got done, I didn't really care whether he went to heaven or hell. I was just glad to get the ordeal done. Yeah. Well, when I say we grew up poor, we did. All the kids at school talked about their Christmas presents, and most of them would get a new bicycle. Well, we lived so far out of town, I told them we got a new bike too. We never got a new bike. But it sounded good at the time. But let me tell you, if you're going to lie, you better be smart about it. I didn't have as good a bike as they did, but I got a new bicycle. I never got a new bicycle until after I was married. But I knew if I had one better than they did, they'd want to come home with me and ride it. But if they had one better than I did, that was fine. But we lived 18 miles from town, from the school. But we did have a bicycle. We found one in the dump one time. You see, the dump was our Goodwill. We visited it often. You can find treasures there. We pulled a bicycle out of the dump and then went to Trading Rabbits to find some wheels to go on it. We couldn't find the back wheel with bearings in it, so we put 2 front wheels on it. No chain, no brakes, but it would come down that mountain. And we had a big man that lived beside us, and he was mentally challenged, and he was 6'2", weighed about 240 pounds, had the mind of a 6-year-old, and he wanted to play with us. Well, we would push that bicycle up the highway, get on that bicycle, and when you went to rolling, you was rolling. There was a bank there. After you crossed the churchyard, there was a bank there. And we would spend a day or so piling brush up, way higher in our head, because when you come down that hill and went across that churchyard and up that hill, you had to have something to stop you, and that pile of brush was our stop. Oh, it would skin you up, but the ride was worth it. It was worth it. And you could see where we come off the highway and hit that gravel chat in the churchyard. Our tracks was right there and about a 2 foot. I come off that hill one day and I was sailing. Man, we would ride that bicycle, push it back up that mountain, somebody else would ride. And this guy is standing out there with a broom saying, "Stop sign." Well, ain't no chain or brakes or nothing else. But I knew that Lee would knock you off that bicycle. I knew that. He'd say, "Stop sign." I'd say, "Lee, I can't stop." "I'll knock you off that bicycle, Pecker, would you?" So I laid that bicycle over and it just flipped and I rolled in the chat. Got up, throwed rocks off of him, at him and run him off. Pushed the bicycle back up there and here come Terry off the mountain. I heard Lee say, "Stop sign." I said, "He's back. He's back." Well, Terry done the same thing I did. Well, Bob, my brother Bob, is a whole lot younger than we are and smaller, and he said, "I'll run over him." I said, "Bob, you have a better chance running through the side of the church." "No, I'll run over him." "Well, if you're going to do that, we're going to put this bicycle back up to Berkeley's house. You're going to really get a ride." And we're hollering down across the holler, "Lee, we're coming down. Bob's going to run over you." And he'd holler back, "You better not. I'll knock you off that bicycle, you pecker, would you?" Now, Dad never would let us go without our shirt, but Bob unbuttoned his shirt except the top 2 buttons because that would make you go faster. It would just flop in the wind. So we're pushing Bob and we're trying to keep up behind him. He's getting farther out there and he's screaming, "I'm going to run over you, Lee. Here I come." And old Lee standing down there right by them tracks with that broom. Well, Bob couldn't even turn the bicycle over. He just good to stay up on it. And we heard this whop. We made the curve just to see Bob go sailing through there and the bicycle flip end over end. Lee knocked the breath out of him. Lifted him off that bicycle. We all run down there. We're hitting him on the back and trying to help him get his breath. And while we're down there, he leaned over the top of us and said, "When I say stop, I mean stop." So the ride was over. It was just over like that. Well, you can tell how smart I am from these stories. We just figured things out, and I still do that. Things go on in my head that I don't even talk about to people. Guys, you ever get in a car with your wife and she said, "What do you want to eat?" And you suggest the wrong thing. Yeah. Peggy, we get in the car and she said, "What would you like to eat?" I think, well, I mentioned this. "No, we eat there last week." I said, "Well, you pick." No, you go ahead and pick." "Okay, I'll suggest something else." "No, we're not eating there." I said, "Well, you pick." No, you go ahead and pick." "But there ain't but one more place to go." I said, "Since we're all dressed up, why don't we go to McDonald's?" I know that gets a charge out of her. But you just say the wrong answer sometimes. And she has to straighten me out. But my wife has a talent that I don't know if your wife has the same kind of talent. It's called drive-by knowledge. You've heard of drive-by shootings? We have drive-by knowledge. Just drive by a place and she figures it out. Yeah. We're driving by this house and we've been driving by there for years, and an old man and old woman sitting out in the front yard. But we went by there one day and there's a bunch of cars out there, and she said, "I bet one of them died." I said, "You think so?" "Well, look at all them cars." I said, "What if they're having a reunion?" "No, there wouldn't be that many cars at a reunion." I said, "Well, which one of you think it was, the man or the woman?" She said, "Well, I don't know everything." I said, "I was driving too fast when we went by." "We'll turn around and go back by and I'll drive slower and see if you can figure this out." She's got that gift in drive-by knowledge. We just drive by somewhere, and boy, she got a whole story about it. Yeah. Me and Miss Peggy have come a long, long way. We have been married 48 years, and I tell everybody, I know she's had 12 good ones out of that. 3 days here, a month and a half there, a year here, put it all together. I know she's had 12. No matter what she said, she's had 12 out of the 48. But several years ago, we haven't been married very long, and we've lived the biggest part of our married life in a travel trailer because we've evangelized. And we were parked over here at, it's not Washburn. What is the name of that park? Over here by the lake? Anybody help me with that? They have a walking trail there. Everybody talking at once, I can't hear. Yeah. Anyway, they used to have a trailer park there. They have water and electric, but no sewer hookup. We had come into this area, and we had 4 or 5 revivals, and I said, let's just park in this park and keep it there, and we'll do these revivals around here. Well, about 2 weeks after being there, she said, you got to dump that tank. I said, oh, no, not yet. 2 days later, you better dump that tank. I can smell it in the house. Well, I could too, but I wasn't going to tell her that. Now, it would have been easy for me to just hook onto it, take it out to a dirt road, and fertilize the road. That would have been easy. But I didn't want to take it down. And the hill come down like this, and we'd backed in like that. So I'd take a shovel and dig down a little bit, and I had me a little can. But I got me 2 trash cans, 33-gallon cans. Put them back in the truck, had a camper shell. Took me nearly all day long to do that. I got sick. Filled up the tanks. Them cans are full in the back of the truck, and I told her, I said, now you get back there and hold those cans. Whatever you do, don't you let those cans turn over. We'll never get that smell out of this truck. She did. She got back there and just squatted down. Well, the can was holding her more than she was holding the can. And it was a standard shift truck. That's where she didn't drive it and me hold the cans. She said she could drive a standard shift, but I'd seen her drive a standard shift. She'd miss a gear every once in a while and buck the rest of the way trying to find it. So I made it down the hill all right, got out there going around by the lake. It was right here in Russellville where this happened. Just got lined out in 4th gear, and there was a man down there by the pump station who had been fishing, I guess. But he had a light blue Falcon, I remember that. And he popped out of that hill right in front of me. And I slammed on my brakes, and when I did, I heard her scream. Put my mirror down there, and she had long red hair, longer than she's got now. Her hair was matted to her head, and she's bear hugging that tank. And I said, Jesus, this is not good. She had toilet paper hanging off her glasses. She's sitting there and she's just crying, crying. So I pull over the side of the road, run over there and let the tailgate down and run back and hear it all in. And all she'd say, you don't love me. That's all she would say. I said, just let me close this tailgate and I'll take you to the car wash and I'll spray you off. You know, we figure this stuff out. We figure it out. You're not taking me to no car wash, you take me back. I said, I've got to get this smell out of this truck, and I can do you the same way. I'll just wash you off. But I seen that wasn't working. So I turned around the middle of the road, took her back, let her out there at the public restrooms, and she's walking up like this and met 2 ladies, and they just backed up and said, ooh. And all she would tell them, she never explained nothing, he don't love me. So she said, he don't love me. Well, I fixed her a pan of water and took it to her to clean up. I don't know what else I could have done. We lived through that. Several years later, when we were pastoring Hector, my brother brought an evangelist that was preaching revival at his church for me to meet, and they were there at the house, and we were telling these old stories. And this evangelist said, I got a story for you, but I don't believe anybody is this stupid. That's what he said. I have never called anybody stupid in my life. I've asked a few people if they was, but I've never called anybody stupid. And he's telling this story about this man and this woman dumping this sewer, and boy, Peggy bowed up, and I punched her, and I said, let's see how this turns out. He's from South Texas. And so he told the story, and oh, we just laughed. I mean, we had a big laugh, and he said, I don't believe anybody can be that stupid. I said, yeah, they can. And then Peggy blurted out and said, you're looking at them. We're the one with the sewer story. All the fun we've had through the years of time. I mean, we have had some kind of fun, and just, just living life. Sometimes you have to make your own fun. Now, I said earlier when I started, I've been to 11 different schools, and some of them 2 times apiece. One time we moved from Marshall, Arkansas to Dexter, Missouri. I was in the 8th grade. Now, this story was requested or I wouldn't be telling it. Okay. I was in the 8th grade, and it was my job, being the oldest, to sign the younger kids up in school. But when we moved to Dexter, Missouri, we moved in an old store building. Well, when you're in the 8th grade, that's embarrassing. L&M Grocery? Where do you live? We live in L&M Grocery. Well, how'd you get by? We tore the shelves out. How many rooms did it have? 2. But it did have an indoor bathroom, and I was thankful for that. That was wonderful, because we'd never had one before. Now then, I told the boys, I said, I'm going to go over here 2 blocks and catch the bus, because when it was a store, it was also a bus stop for the kids. So they still come there and sat on the front porch, and we had just moved in, and I said, I'm going to catch the bus. I'll get off at your school, at grade school, and I'll check you in. So I did. I checked them in. Well, it was 9:30 before I got to junior high. I'd walked over to junior high, and that was a thrill to be able to walk to school. If you walk to school where I was raised most of the time, it'd take you get there the next day. But anyway, I got there, and I got to junior high at 9:30. And there was 2 special education teachers come in there, and they got to talking. And I thought, I could use a rest. And when Mr. Cloud, the principal, come in, he asked me what grade I was in. I told him, I said, I'm in special education. And then he threw me a loop. He said, what level are you on? Well, in those days, it took 6 weeks to get your transcript from one school to another. And I said, sir, I don't know. He gave me levels, and I chose 3rd grade. If you're going to do it right. Mama said, you don't even bring any books home from school. I said, oh, this is the best school I've ever been in. We're way ahead of them. Man. I was doing good, but I had a cousin that went to that school. One day I was at my locker, my books fell out, and she said, Dean, I heard that this is not right. What have you done? Not a thing. These are not even my books. Anyway, the next day I walked home from school. When I crossed the highway, we lived at 718 North Sassafras. Right down from there. Lived Grandma's house most of the time. That's where she lived. Dad was standing out in front of their house and looked like he had a mop handle in his hand. And I knew when I crossed the road, I just knew the cat was out of the bag. I was caught, and this was execution day. I was going to die. So I tuned up, went to crying about a block and a half before I got to it. My dad tied into me. He whipped on me, pulled a chair out on the floor and said, "You'll be in prison by the time you're 16 years old. I'm glad everything you say don't pronounce a curse on you." And Mom say, "Harold, we got to go to school and straighten this out." No, he'll be 40-year-old still in the 8th grade. I'm not going. Oh, it was a bad time. I didn't even go to sleep that night. Dad wouldn't let me. Well, we went to school the next day. Mama had me by my ear and took me into the principal's office. She didn't make an appointment or nothing, just took me in and slammed me down and said, "Dean has signed himself up in special education. He's not supposed to be there." He said, "Mel, maybe you ought to have a seat." And then him and her got into it. I mean, Mama she was 4 foot 11 inches tall, but she had a temper that was over 7 foot tall. And man, they just tied up. And finally she said, "I'm not leaving here till you call Floyd Ballantyne at Marshall, Arkansas." He finally called Floyd. I don't know what the conversation was on his end. I knew what it was on Mr. Cloud's end. He said, "Well, I'll be. I'll swan." In all the years I've been in education, well, I just had a feeling that wasn't good. He hung the phone up and he looked at me and he said, "Son, with an IQ like you've got, what would possess you to just come in here and deliberately sign yourself up on 3rd grade level?" I took a big breath to answer him. Mama slapped me across the mouth and said, "Shut up. This is what got you here to begin with." So from then on, when I went to school, Mama always called to see what grade I was in. Now, if my mom was here, she would have got up, walked out on this story, because she told me, she said, "It still embarrasses me to this day that you would pull a stunt like that." And then she turned and said, "No, I believe you would do it. We should have left you there." But that was life. That's just how we live. We just had great time. And I was good with the kids at school because they thought that was cool. But they called Mom and Dad in and mandated that they take me to a doctor because I was too hyper. But when we lived in the mountains, I had a lot to do. There in Dexter, Missouri, I didn't have nothing to do. So we went to the doctor. He knew what I was there for. He's bound to know. But he checked my throat, checked up my nose, checked my eyes, and then he looked in my ears, and I thought, he's looking for a brain. Good luck there. He gave a prescription, and of course my dad, we never had nothing, and my dad was so tight. Oh, he was just so tight. But he was mandated by the school, so they had to do it, and they went and got a prescription for medicine to slow me down. I'll never forget sitting in the car and thinking, I got something terminal the way they're acting. I don't know if I'll make it to the 9th grade. Dad pitched that white sack back there with them pills in it, and he said, "That's a month's worth. If that don't cure you, I've got something that will." When we went to the doctor, we was over it a month. Dad never gave it more than a month. You get over it. But life was so fun. Just so fun. I love scaring people. I love to watch their reaction. We were in Tennessee. I don't know if East Tennessee or not here. A couple years ago, and this church had bought the National Guard Armory, and it's just a maze on the inside, walls everywhere. And we were parked behind the church, and I heard Peggy come through the back door to go to the restroom. You come down this hall, make a turn, make another turn, make another turn. Then there's an opening there with the women's restroom and the men's restroom. I was in a little room there doing some typing, being real spiritual, but I needed a break. Just needed a carnal break. When I heard her go in the bathroom, I run down to the nursery because I'd seen it the day before, and they had a stuffed lion. And he sat up this tall. Big mane, big long tail, over 4 foot long. And I grabbed that lion, and I run down there, and I set it right in front of the door and turned out all the lights but one little light that would really shine on that lion. And I stood behind the door. I heard her washing her hands and all that, and she opened the door, and she done like that, and I said, I honestly thought she's going to tear the bathroom apart. And then when I went to wheezing from laughing, she got mad. I mean, just really, really mad. But I've always enjoyed scaring people and stories on that. When we built the church there at Whitehall, the second building that I built there was a long auditorium with a hallway all the way around it. So the auditorium part didn't have any windows in it. It was just dark. Man, when the lights off, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And we had a lady that cleaned the church, and she's just a bundle of nerves. And she just hyper. She was hyper, and I was. And so I was in there praying one day, and I heard her come through the back, and she was singing. Couldn't carry a tune, but she was singing. And I thought, I need a break from prayer. I do. I like to take them breaks every now and then. So I ran over there and turned off all the lights beside the door, the side door that you come in the auditorium on. And I had a short sleeve shirt on, and I just put my hand up over the light switch. Now, in my mind, I had all this worked out. She's going to touch my hand. She's going to scream and take off running. It's going to be a lot of fun. She opened the door. It's so dark in there, and she's scratching on the paneling. And she found my hand. And she rubbed my hand twice, and she didn't scream out loud. She just said, "Oh," and passed out. Just passed out. I turned the light on, her lips is purple, and she said, I thought, I'm going to have to make up a story about finding her like this. Because I thought I had scared her to death. So I got down there over her, and I'm slapping her on the face like that and trying to get her to wake up. And she opened her eyes and just as calm as a lamb. And she's never calm. She looked up at me and she said, "Brother Dean, you like scared me to death." I said, "I thought I did." Yeah. Right after I had built that church, it had been raining. And from standing on the pulpit on the left-hand side of the church, we couldn't even park over there because it was so muddy. We didn't have the parking lot done. So we were parking on this side and over at the bank in the Western Auto. And we were running about 400 at that time. And so a guy called me. I was going to go to the hospital that morning and do some visiting, and a guy called me and he said, "Brother Dean, I'd like to have that sheep music that the choir sung Sunday. They've got all the changes, key changes written around that." And I said, "Sure. I'll leave the back door unlocked and you can just go in there and get it." I started to the hospital driving down the road, and I thought, I missed a chance to scare him if I go visit these sick people. I didn't think they were probably sick and they could make it another day. So I turned around and went back, parked my truck over at Western Auto, went in the church, took a microphone up in the balcony and plugged it in. And just sat there in the dark. When he come through the back door, he's singing as loud as he could sing. And I knew he was scared. I thought, this is working good. Had the PA system on. Well, we had just moved in that auditorium, so I had these big speakers. They stood up at that high, and they had the big horns in them, and they were sitting in the baptistry hole. We hadn't even mounted them up in the ceiling at that point. We just moved in. So I'm sitting there real quiet in the balcony, and it is so dark, and he opened the door and turned on a couple lights and just stood there. Not another word. And he got down, and he looked under the seats. Then he looked on the platform under the seats there. Now, our platform was about this high. And I'm just sitting up there. But I had taken all that sheet music in a stool like this. I'd laid it on the stool where he could find it, right in front of the speakers. And he's slipping up through there, come up the steps and just slipping. And when he got almost to the sheet music, I said, "Hey, God." Man, that guy jumped this high, wheeled in the air, bounced off that platform. He didn't go out the back door. Somehow he got that side door open, and he's out there in that mud. I got to tell you, I was laughing so hard I couldn't get my breath. Finally, I heard his truck start. Man, he left. I mean, he just left. I went down there and opened the door. The first set of tracks is a good 4 to 5 foot from the door. And then you could see hand tracks in the mud and skid marks about this long. He was on all fours getting out of there. Well, that was over quick. I still had time to do my visiting. So I went to the hospital and prayed for all those folks. Anything puts you in a good prayer time, then a good time. We might ought to call a prayer meeting after this is over. I was there nearly all day long. I come back to the house and Peggy said, "Boy, Dean, we got a problem." I said, "What's wrong?" She called this boy by name and said, "He went in the church today and something got after him." I said, "You're kidding?" Yeah, his wife said, she called down here and said, "I don't know what you Pentecostal people do, but there's a demon in that church. We need to have a seance and get rid of it." I'm thinking, just election would have done that. Yeah. So I went down to see them and told them it was me. I would have been better off to let them just believe it's a demon. But they didn't come to church for a few weeks after that. But he told me, he said, "Preacher," when they got over his mad spell, he said, "That scared me so bad." He said, "My bowels turned to water, just like that." I said, "Oh, Rowdy, that's going to make the story better." He said, "Not only did I have to wash the mud off of me, I had to take a complete bath." I said, "Well, it's worth every bit of it." Worth every bit of it. Well, I don't know whether you have or not, but I've had a good time tonight. A good time tonight.